Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. You guys are in for a treat this episode. I am joined by Ellie Morgan, who's a certified birth doula and a lactation counselor. She is a second-generation doula, and she was telling me how she's always loved birth but never thought about pursuing it as a career until her friends and family and people close to her started having children, and just like that, she was hooked. So now she is doing the thing. Her mission is to support, guide, and accompany birthing people during their monumental moments. And her approach to birth and postpartum work is grounded in empowerment, education, and empathetic support. So she's been doing lots of different support recently, and even most recent, right before we recorded this episode, she announced that she's going to be going to school for midwifery. So join us as we start chatting about all of the things that come along with how you can prep as a whole family for your feeding plan postpartum. Let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellie. I'm so happy to have you. I feel like it's been a bit coming. I've been following you on social media for a while, and then finally was like, I'm gonna message her. And so glad I did, because I'm excited for today's topic.
Well, I feel the exact same. The birth world is so small, but we're also busy, and postpartum life and everything interacts in funny ways. But I'm so glad we found
Me
the time to
too.
do it.
I know. And it's so crazy. I feel like that's so true. And I feel like a broken record saying that, like, there's so many people that I've meant to connect with and just haven't. And thank gosh for the podcast, because that forces me to connect with people. But it's been great. So yeah, I'm excited to have you. Before we kind of jump into our topic, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about you and like what you do and provide to your community, and maybe like how you got into that world?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, it is so funny thinking back on this journey. I really don't think I thought I would be here. So, my mom actually volunteered in hospitals like my whole life as a birth doula, and then she would do some work in like NICU support for people on top of also being an educator.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
I thought it was just like a thing that were like into, but I never really thought about it as a full career.
Yeah.
And so prior to birth work, I was sort of like have been in the nonprofit space in Boston for about 10 years. And for that, for me, it's all about like advocacy, empowerment, like being in community and living like values-based work. And so honestly, like almost all of that translates to birth postpartum support
Yeah.
work. But I took my class. Feels like we were just coming out of COVID. So, like 3-ish years ago. And I did it because some of my closest friends were pregnant. And I was like,
Ugh.
wow, I'm really interested in just knowing about this. And so
Yeah.
I did not really think that I would dive in completely.
The slippery slope.
And it really is. It's hard to get yourself out once you're in it. And so, yeah, I was trying to balance being a birth doula, which is primarily where I spend most of my time, and working full time. And for anyone who's in this world, that is not the most feasible task.
Nope.
And so, and like a lot of this, it's also a little bit of Pandora's box. So I did my birth doula certification, and then I realized like, oh, wow, feeding a baby is so important. And like,
Yep.
how do we set ourselves up to know all of it, or as know as much of it as we can, so that I'm a big believer in like the educational piece of all of this too. And so I was like meeting with people prenatally and doing preferences or talking about what was most important to them. And I was like, wow, I should know more about postpartum and like feeding. And so that kind of led me into doing my CLC. And I don't do as much postpartum. I don't advertise that I do postpartum work, I should say. I sometimes do if folks like friends in this work connect and they think there'd be somebody who would be a really good fit, or birth clients realized that they could use some additional support. And I'm heading off to become a nurse midwife, which will take me some time, but that is for me just feels really values aligned too. And I think about like at least in the Boston area, so many people are having babies in hospitals. It's just sort
Yeah,
of like the current landscape here. And I think it is empowering to have access to midwifery care, like, within a hospital setting. So that's sort of like
yeah,
my other passion piece around all of this is like getting everyone like supportive, empathetic care in such an
right.
amazing and scary time in your life?
Absolutely. I'm so excited for you to be doing that because I think that there is a place where the two worlds kind of meet, right? Like there's a lot of people that are doing very hospitalized, medicalized births, and there's people that are doing a lot more of the holistic midwifery, birth cottage, birth center kind of births. And I think there's really a space for a lot of people in the middle. And so I'm super excited that that's like a path and that that can be kind of grown because I do think it's something that can grow into being such a helpful place for people. So I'm super excited. Um, today, was it today or yesterday that you literally just posted about this online too?
It
So
was
like,
Yeah, very recent.
oh
I've
my
been like
gosh.
scared, nervous to pay the deposit,
Oh my
obviously.
gosh.
But I came home and I was like, I came home from a birth and then said to my partner, I was like, I think I just want to do it. And if I don't do it, I'm not going to do it. So,
Full send it.
yeah, right. Can't go back now, I guess.
Oh my gosh. That's so exciting. Well, and in this will go up in a couple weeks. So, maybe the reality will set in a little bit more for Ellie and you can head over and give her some love on social media. But yeah, so I'm super excited. I think that's super cool. And you have a great like bunch of information to kind of share because you have seen so many different things, which is really cool. And so I'm excited today because in that same way, we kind of want to support people's feedings and whatever, feeding their babies, not them feeding, but same difference, um, in like a way that feels good to them, right? So
Yeah.
I'm excited when you mentioned kind of talking about the idea of not just feeding plans and how we can like prepare for that prenatally for that postpartum feeding plan, but really bringing that into like being a whole family thing because I do hear, and you mentioned it, and I hear it all the time. Well, you mentioned it via text when we were chatting, but how most of the time these moms, these birthing people are feeling like the pressure is all on their shoulders when it comes to feeding, and partners are often just told like you can wash the bottles or the pump parts if that's a thing. And like, sure, that's beautifully helpful, but there's a lot more to it.
Totally. And I love how you're talking earlier because for me, I am like love that middle ground, that gray space on all of this. Like I love to read the evidence. I love to like know as much as I can. And I also just know that life doesn't always happen that way. And so like how do we embrace this like nuance? And
Hmm.
I think feeding I mean, so many things, but feeding falls in this category where like we hear all the information in like out of context. We take a class, we learn things, but like how do we actually integrate it and how do we
Hmm.
integrate it in a way that feels good to us? So that's like
Right.
kind of how this all will play out is like there's all this information. It can be very overwhelming. And then how do we also like personalize it? And I think about birth and postpartum as like team sports. I'm like not not a
I love
sorority
that.
person, but I'm
Oh,
trying.
ditto.
That's like the way it sits in my head is like we know we can't do it alone. And
Yep.
we all have a role to play. So like why don't we talk about those roles and not just like, sort of take it on ourselves or like not be super clear. Brene Brown has this thing that's like being clear is kind. And I always think about that, like
Yeah.
setting ourselves up for success or our family members or our friends for success is like being clear about what we need and like talking about it first, which
Yeah.
I think prenatally is easier because it's hard after humans have babies, there is a lot less time and a lot less brain space?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think especially for families that are first-time parents, because you don't know what you don't know is a phrase that I hear and I preach all the time, especially with first-time parents and inquiry calls that I get, because you really don't, right? And you just kind of go by what you see online or what you expect. And when you think about especially families that are planning to nurse or breastfeed, whether it be exclusively or just for the first few weeks and then they're pumping or something, you know. that really does sound like it's a solo man sport, right?
Yeah,
Like, that sounds like that person's gonna be by themselves and that no one else can really help. When in reality, as people of this community, we know that that's definitely not the case. There's a lot more to do.
totally.
So I know that you have some tips and tricks that you were kind of thinking of sharing with everybody here that can kind of help them to prepare that feeding plan. If they are prenatal, ideally, you start that feeding plan then, right? But, if you are postpartum, these probably can still be beautifully of help to you. So
Totally.
yeah. Yeah. Do you want to dive into those?
Yeah, yeah. And interrupt me, whatever, like,
I
or
love it.
questions or whatever makes sense. But I think things when I was reflecting this morning that I'm like, okay, if we all knew this before having a baby, I think it would help us on our feeding journey. So I think about classes, right? Some people will take like childbirth ed or like, first aid class or new like infant care, newborn care. And I think sometimes we don't always think about breastfeeding classes, or we think about them and it's like the last thing, like usually late in someone's third trimester, and maybe they squeeze it in.
Right.
Or maybe they have a baby first, you know?
Yeah.
So I think even there's so many amazing resources like online, maybe depending where you're going to deliver, or so many incredible doulas like offer classes. And I think if you do a 1 hour to 2 hour breastfeeding class, learn the basics, write them down, and then like
Right.
have them, right? And it
Yeah.
can be a lot of information, but I think if you need a place to like prioritize, it's like learn about a good latch. Like things that I think sometimes surprise people when I talk to them about it is like it shouldn't hurt, period, full stop, right? Like if you're gonna breastfeed, or like if you want to combo feed, or you want to do formula, or you want to do bottles, like what is out there and what do you want to have at
Right.
home, so you're not like which is great. We're very lucky you
Yeah.
can like Amazon a bottle and it can be at your house in 2 days if that's what you need to do. But that way it's just checked off the list, right? Not something that we have to worry about after. And I think it doesn't have to be like a 6 hour class. Do it online or take it like there's some where it's like little sections. Do a
Yeah.
15-20 minute section and then come back to it. So I
Hmm.
think that's a game changer if you can try and like educate yourself on all of it
Hmm.
before.
Yeah.
A similar idea is like find an IBCLC or a CLC or a feeding specialist, or where whoever is in your community,
Yep.
and call them before you have your baby.
Yes.
And small things like check if you have insurance, do they take your insurance? Like those
Right.
little things. And sometimes I'll even tell folks, especially I work with a lot of first time families, and like breastfeeding can make them feel anxious, which just makes so much sense. Like, when was the last time we did something new for the first time? Like, it makes
Right.
sense to feel overwhelmed, but like for those folks, I usually say, like, set up an appointment for like a few weeks after your due date and move
Yep.
it if you need to. Move it up, move
Right.
it back. I think that folks in the lactation world are incredible because they also can get texts like, "Hey, I need someone to come over tomorrow," and they like make it happen. You're
Yes.
like, so maybe someone who can come over, and maybe someone who you can like connect with prenatally, so you have a relationship moving
I was
forward.
just gonna say that because I mean, when I do inquiry calls, like prenatal meetings, whatever, with people, I say this. And I think it's so important with, any provider, but lactation especially, because whether your breastfeeding experience and feeding experience goes beautifully or it goes sideways, you're going to want to reach out to somebody just to
Yeah.
confirm that everything is going well, right? And being able to make sure that the person that you're reaching out to, you not only feel comfortable with, but that their values align with what you're looking for. Just there's all different types of people and personalities, and not that people's personalities are bad, right? But we all mesh differently with each other. So finding a lactation support person that speaks the same kind of like language and
Mhm.
emotional kind of thought process as you, but then also can like support whatever goals you have. I think really kind of aligns because everyone has their like thing and can totally help with whatever goals you're trying to meet. So yeah, chat with a couple of them too. See who's who and what you like, right?
I love that. Especially, I think about this with this world all the time. If someone's going to come over to your house and you've slept like 2 hours in the
Right.
past day, like you want to feel good with them. And it's so important to have somebody you feel like you trust. And I love the part about like being values aligned, right? Like we all have different values and I think different family structures, different ways and people who will be around us that are supporting us. And it needs to be a good fit. It really
Right.
does.
Right. It's so important. It really is. I love that. Okay, cool. So we've got, those two tips are great. I think that, preparing kind of for that, reaching out to providers, seeing what you can get, finding a class and kind of like educating yourself, because I think there is so much to know and kind of having that, right mind or right stance to go into this process with. A little bit of expectation is great. What else do you typically do you think would be so helpful?
So, one other like totally logistical one is I think feeding a baby, especially overnight, is like a little bit of like a painstaking experience. You're tired. So, what are the things we can control before? Maybe like your last few weeks of pregnancy, you like prep snacks, or you pick about like, I'm going to listen to this podcast, or I think I'm going to try and like listen to this audiobook. Like, what are the things that you're going to do to like kind of arm yourself for when it gets hard? And I just think overnight is hard because most of us aren't used to being up like between the
Right.
hours of 2 and 4 a.m. with something
Mm-hmm.
to do. And so, um, freeze some food, have a family member like run to Costco and put together little packs. I always think like I'm a big food human, so no surprise I'm thinking about like that in this piece, but like something you can eat with one hand, something
Yep.
that is either like good to go or you can like warm it up within 30 seconds, but also knowing like you probably are going to have your hands full. And that same thing, like music, a playlist, a book, or something like also to just like keep us one awake if it's overnight, but also like feeling like ourselves. It
Right.
can get easy to get lost in all of this. Or like, for some people, it's like I know I'm gonna need my parent or partner, whoever's with you overnight, like up with me while I'm feeding. Or I actually feel like I'll be totally fine. But,
Yeah.
thinking about it in advance that you kind of have a game plan of those supports for when you're in the moment.
Absolutely. Because for some people, feeding or of whatever type in the middle of the night can be 15, 20 minutes and your baby can be
Yeah,
great and knock right back out. Or you could be somebody who needs to feed for longer and is struggling with feedings and your baby's having a little bit of a harder time and then they're a little bit more awake and you could be awake for an hour and a half or, something like
totally.
that. And so I think, yes, arming yourself with like just tools of the toolbox, right? Keeping yourself awake, knowing that like whether you want your partner to be up or not. And then, even if you say no, then waking them up if it's been an hour and maybe handing baby
Yeah.
off or something, right? Um, because yeah, I think that being able to do that and having those resources and like knowing different things that you can rely on can feel so helpful in the middle of the night. And that comes from somebody who works night shifts. So I'm totally here with it.
I know. I feel the same way. I'm someone who like, yes, spends more time up overnight than a lot of people. And still I'm like, yeah, I need things to help me do that,
Oh yeah.
with and the last little thing I was like thinking a little bit about is I think that the way that people have babies also impacts the way that we maybe want to or don't want to feed them. And I think that there are some things that I don't usually call them birth plans. I just don't think that there's any plans in any of this. But I think about like your preferences, right? So
Yeah.
birth preferences, feeding preferences, like if you want to exclusively breastfeed, like let's make sure we get you like a good 2 hours of uninterrupted skin to skin after having a baby, right? Or
Yeah.
if you are having a planned C-section, like how do we think about feeding in a way that like also thinks about what type of birth we're going to have? They're just
Mhm.
so intertwined. And I think I always say to people, I'm like laughing because I know I said this yesterday. Step one is to like not have a placenta anymore to make our milk. Step two is to like bring a baby to a nipple, right? And so like when it all feels really overwhelming, like holding on to those small pieces, like
Yeah.
don't have a placenta anymore. Usually, that one's not as much in our control. The second one is like offering baby breast 12 times a day, which sounds like so much, but it's true, right? Every 2 hours for the
Yeah,
first little bit, just to get yourself off to a good start. And I've worked with folks who were exclusively going to formula feed, and I think sometimes we forget about all of them in this process.
yeah,
And so it's like, okay, so let's like not stimulate your nipples within the, first few days. And like it's little things of like when you take a shower, you just know like nipple stimulation might cause colostrum to come out, or like let's do all we can to support people regardless of what they want to do, but to think about it
absolutely.
in that for those first few days.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a good thing to also say is if you are somebody who isn't wanting to breastfeed and lactate, that you also still should reach out to some sort of like feeding specialist of some type, lactation consultant, IBCLC, whatever, because not only can they help with breastfeeding parents, but they can also help with bottle fed parents and babies that are feeding from bottles. And also if you're trying to like wean, because obviously we want to do it in a way that isn't going to be painful and engorging and not fun for anyone. And so
A
I think that
thousand
sometimes people
percent.
forget. I've heard so many people be like, "What do you mean I should contact them? I'm talking about bottle feeding." And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. They're all about latch and just babies eating. Like that's what you're looking
Exactly.
for."
I know, and I almost think more so. I think that a lot of
Yeah,
times in like birth centers, hospitals, there's a lot of support for breastfeeding. That's just like the climate that we are in currently.
right.
And so like just making sure you have support regardless of what you want to do. And I think yeah, weaning, thinking about what type I could like go in a whole
So many
tangent. I
things.
won't, but like there's a 1 million bottles. Like, what bottles should you buy? Or, like, not just maybe the free ones you get somehow from Target when they know that you're having a baby, like some of those
Yep.
things, right? Getting support on what would work for you.
I love that. I think that's so important. Now, I know that there's obviously so many more tips and tricks, but I think that's like such a great place to kind of like start with that. And then I would love to know kind of how you suggest to the families you work with on how to bring the family aspect into all of this. Like we
Yes.
spoke a little bit about like having somebody there in the night to kind of like help you in those, and that can be really great. But I'm sure there's tons more that like you experience as well, that I'd love to hear a little more about.
Yeah, and I think the first question is like prenatally thinking about like what does your support system look like and like who is going to be there on your team to support you. And so for folks who are have a partner at home, I think it's like really important to talk about what are your goals as a family. And I think there's let's think like exclusive breastfeeding and then we can think about combo feeding.
Yeah.
So I think especially like you said earlier, exclusive breastfeeding, sometimes partners are like where am I involved in this? Right. And
Yeah.
I think that sometimes that looks like just like saying, okay, I'll feed, you'll do all the diapers. And that is very important for non-gestational parents to do diapers because the other person had a baby. Like it's important to have people have different tasks, but like how do we make it more than that? And I think I have had a lot of partners say to me, which I think is like so wonderful and vulnerable, is like it feels almost like you're missing something, like a bonding moment or an
Yeah.
opportunity. And I think it's like really essential to think, okay, so yes, do diapers, yes, help soothe, yes, get babies back to sleep or whatever it looks like around. I think like if you think about breastfeeding as like the middle, like the partner supporting all around that is a really good way to think about the first like month-ish, right?
Hmm.
And what is their bonding time? Like what is their special thing?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we, when I brainstorm with folks, we're like, could it be bath time? Could it be
Right.
like a large part of the nighttime routine? Could it be like tummy time, playtime? Like it's everyone has different strengths, right? And so it's about finding what's your thing. And, especially for partners to just feel like they own a little piece of it. If the
Right.
birthing person owns chest feeding, breastfeeding, like let's get somebody else their thing. And I think
Right.
it feels good to feel like you have something to do. And so, yes, help baby come to breast. Yes, change diapers. And what's your special thing?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important because otherwise it can feel very much like, checking the boxes off the list and almost being like the house help, right?
Yeah.
But being able to remember that like you're not just helping your partner, you're part of the family, right? Like
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
also your child. So helping you figure out a way to connect with them. I think that's such a great thing. I had one parent, one partner who like the one way he could calm down the baby was just like skin to skin. And so we did a lot of like baby wearing and talking about that. And
Yeah.
that's great. Or somebody else who did, like you said, bath time and did like a little baby massage. And that was like his thing. He loved learning how to do baby massage. So there's that. I had one partner who loved to go on runs, so she would take the baby with her while like
Yeah.
the other parent was at home. So, that's really great too. You can do lots of different
Yeah.
options. I love that.
I love all those examples. And there's so many ways, right? Um, and I think another really special way is if people are doing any pumping or bottle feeding, either formula or breast milk. I think it's really cool to think about when is partner, if you have a parent staying to help you all, like, can we find them a time that they offer the bottle, right? And can we find them a time that they offer the bottle that is helpful to you? So it's
Yeah.
like overnight is a great one if someone needs to get some sleep. But I also think I'm thinking about a client who when you said running, like she really wanted to like go for a walk and start to get back on her running journey. And so I think that she had her mom staying with her, and so her mom always did a bottle like mid-morning so she could go for her walk and
That's
run, right?
beautiful.
So like we find the times that make it meaningful for everyone. I think um it just looks different. Or if
Yeah.
one parent is going back to work, like maybe
Hmm.
when they get home, they have a chance to do that like bottle bonding
Yep.
or I don't know, just like how do we make the schedule and consistency so it feels like they
Yeah.
have their time too.
And I find that most of the time, that middle of the night support can be really great when both partners are up, but oftentimes the burnout hits really quick or somebody goes back to work and it's really challenging to both be up at the same time.
Yeah.
So when you were kind of mentioning the combo feeding idea or bottle feeding idea, I see a lot of parents kind of splitting up the night into two shifts a lot of the time. And I do find that typically moms birthing people going to bed after they nurse at like, 7, 8 o'clock, whatever. And I find that partners and support people end up being the one giving the bottle at that like 11, 12 o'clock,
Yeah.
whatever, 1 a.m. And then them all going to bed. And then, breastfeeding, chest feeding, if that's happening, happens after that and for the rest of
Yeah.
the feeds. Or vice versa. I had somebody who was like, no, I will stay up and then that 5 a.m. feed is all you and I am going to
Yeah.
sleep until 9 o'clock every day. Like,
Yes.
so for some people it's different, but yeah, I think that for a lot of people it takes a turn. And the big thing I tell my clients when it comes to this is that like it's just a phase of life. Going
Yeah.
to bed at 7 or 8 o'clock is not ideal for anyone, but it's just a phase of life and you're getting your sleep. And that's what matters because that
Yeah.
first stretch of sleep is when babies sleep the longest. So, you know, it won't be for forever.
I know. I love shift sleeping. And it's one of those things prenatally that sometimes I talk with folks about. Is like,
Yep.
is one of you a night person and one of you a morning person? And if
Yep.
so, let's just build the schedule in that way. And I know which one I would want to be. I would want to go to bed at 8 p.m. and sleep as long as I
Me
can. But
too.
but I know that some people are actually like, oh, I will not be able to fall asleep,
Fall
if I
asleep.
have to go to sleep at that time. And so I love that idea. And I also love what you said about it just being a phase, because also so much with feeding and baby milestones and everything is so week to week, day to day, hour by hour, right? And so it kind of is a good transition maybe for us to think about the last part of this is like so much of this is like, let's make a plan, let's make prenatal plans.
Yes.
And we all just know that life doesn't work always like that. And so, how do we build a mindset that is like open to holding on to the pieces of the plans that feel really important? And we
Yep.
let go of what doesn't work. And
Yep.
we know what work maybe week one is not going to work when we hit that 2 month mark. And so,
Absolutely.
um, I just find that this is like a time of life or when having a baby or early postpartum where things feel so out of control a lot of the time. And we're holding on to those things that we can try and control. And then that doesn't always go to plan, right? And it
No.
feels really hard. It just
Yeah.
feels really hard. So like giving ourselves grace, I think, especially around feeding, I try and remember and offer to folks like, neither people in this have done this before.
Right.
Breastfeeding is a learning process. And so, like, especially within first time parent households, like, we just got to find the grace and we got to
Yeah.
try things. And then we need to ask for help, like, call the lactation
I
person you
was
spoke
just
with,
gonna
you
say,
know?
yeah, the phrase that comes to mind that I tell people, specifically when it comes to sleep, but realistically, I've been using it for like everything, is like, if it's working for you, great. And if it's not, then there's resources. And I think that
Yeah.
that's so important. And like also remembering that, like, if it isn't working, there are resources or there are options, right? Like, you don't need to do breastfeeding if you don't want to, and it's just causing you more harm than good in your family, and you're feeling like going an alternative route would be better, then that's great, right?
Yeah.
And I think just like feeling confident and trying to feel confident as you can in
Yeah.
your process is super important.
Yeah, I love it. I think the big piece of this conversation too is like, how is your mental health, right? And
Yeah.
so there's this graphic, and my doula mentor like showed it to me, as you've probably seen it. It's like the graphic of like Legos almost, and it's like, this is the things that babies get from formula, and this is the things babies get from breastfeeding. Which, like, totally hear the point. Thank you for offering it to me. And if this is your mental health that makes up all the benefits of doing formula, then that's what we should do,
Right.
because it's just one of those places I think people can find themselves being particularly hard on themselves. They're like,
Yeah.
I should be able to do better or do that. And like, it's just not always how it goes. And so,
Yeah.
like, pick the option that works for you and the option that works for your family, right? A lot of times I think, like, gestational parents do sort of take the priority in this piece of it, because, like, your body, you should decide what feels good for you.
Yeah.
And, like, it goes back to, like, getting support from the people you need to make it all work for you. And then when it doesn't work, we
Absolutely.
change it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so important. Oh, I love it. You have so many good tips, and I'm super, super happy we got to chat about them, because I think that there is so much that you can prepare for, especially prenatally, to kind of like get your brain in the mindset of, okay, what can I expect, and what should I prepare for, and how do I prepare for these things? Um, because it's a new experience. I love that you said that, right? Like, especially baby, they've never done this before. It's new to them. And even though I like this, also wrote this down as you were talking earlier, even though we know that it's like quote unquote natural to be breastfeeding, right? That doesn't mean that it's going to be easy or just like happen for everybody. For some, it does. But for some, that's definitely not the case. And it takes some hard work and some focus. And I think people don't realize or expect it to be like that at times. And so, really kind of preparing yourself for this experience in whatever way it can go, is so, so important. So I'm super glad, there we go, that you brought that topic up and that you were so willing to come and chat about it. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review, and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.